What's up, investors? It's the Russian Dude. Welcome to another episode of Thank God It's Monday podcast. Today we have Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, an incredible YouTuber who speaks about pretty much everything, including Russia, Ukraine. Some of you guys might not be familiar with him for this reason. Thank you so much, first of all, Daniel, for accepting this call. And if you don't mind, can you please tell us a couple of things about yourself? What do you do here on this platform?
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for inviting me here. I really appreciate it. I am a 21 year, just about 21 year veteran of the U.S. Army. Served both in enlisted and then in an officer capacity, retired in 2015 as a lieutenant colonel. Worked in the Pentagon. I worked in future combat systems in an acquisition program. I had 4 combat deployments everywhere from high-intensity tank-on-tank combat in Desert Storm in 1991 to traditional counterinsurgency stuff. I was a military trainer in Iraq, and then just did just a number of different things in classic counterinsurgency stuff in Afghanistan as well. And so let's say I started working for Defense Priority, a kind of a new think tank in Washington, D.C. that's unique, especially at the time in 2016 when I joined it. I think I was like the 3rd or 4th employee in the organization because it was different in that it was for a strong national defense, but it was for a sane foreign policy and not this neocon kind of lead with military force all the time. We just thought that was counterproductive. It was bad for the United States and not good for anyone. But we do want a strong foreign policy. It's not like we were against defending yourself, et cetera. We're not like peaceniks or whatever. And then in, I guess, 2017 or so, when Trump came in, I started doing a lot of television. I'd go on Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, BBC, et cetera. And I did that for a long time. And then I guess a couple of years ago, a colleague of mine who used to work at Fox News for 17 years said, hey, you know what, we should do our own show and call it The Deep Dive because we didn't like these, going on TV. You get to talk for maybe 45 seconds at a pop when they ask you a question. You got maybe 3 minutes and then it's on to whatever's next. And you don't get a chance to really explain anything in a way that can help people understand what's actually going on. And so we wanted to start this show. That's what we've done. It's called the Daniel Davis Deep Dive on YouTube. And we've tried to make a living by just telling people what's going on. And as best we can, we like to say that we're not pro-Russia, we're not pro-Ukraine, we're not pro-anybody, we're pro-truth. And we like to say this is how the way things are based on my military experience and combat experience, et cetera. And we just call things as they are. And with the idea that we always want everything to get into a situation where there's no war, no conflict, and peace is because everybody wins when that happens. And that's kind of the gist of who we are.
That's incredible resume. I would say, like, you did mention you're going 90 miles per hour before we started this interview. I guess you never stopped for the last decade. You've been going at this speed, sometimes faster, sometimes slower. And you did mention you're not pro-Ukrainian, not pro-Russian, you're pro-truth. I think this is so incredibly important in the work that we do here, at least on YouTube, because you just cannot take completely 100% somebody's position, completely deny the fact of existence of, opposition in Russia, or say something, Russians are all bad. So that is really, I think, really, really important, not to take sides, but just to report on the news as they are, so that the viewers can potentially make their own decisions, conclusions, justifications, things like this. So that is so good you are doing this. Thank you for this. Then I have a question. I did go on your YouTube channel. We're going to talk about, obviously, throughout this interview, and I saw that in the description it says unintimidated and uncompromised, and this is how you pretty much describe yourself. Why did you choose those words? Did something happen? Did someone threaten you? And if so, how did you came out of the situation?
I've had a few run-ins in my time with the truth. Going all the way back. In fact, I mentioned I was in the Future Combat Systems. At the time, the Army organization that was running it said that, this was this magnificent thing that was going to just revolutionize warfare. It was going to turn the United States into the next generation of dominance on the battlefield, et cetera. And it was what they were saying publicly was it was proving itself on the battlefield. And in the simulations and in the testing that was being done at Fort Bliss, Texas, well, I had come from a large scale tank on tank kind of environment, so I knew what it would take to actually fight in the large scale combat. And when I saw what was actually happening behind the scenes and away from the congressional briefings, I'm like, this is nonsense. There's no way this is going to happen. And if you publish, if you bring this to fruition, you're going to be setting us up for a future loss because this is weaker than where we are right now. This is not going in the direction you claim. And so I had a real problem with that because I was thinking, what if my sons join the Army? What if 10 years from then they decide to join the Army and they get into armored vehicles like the type that this program was doing and producing, and I know right now that they wouldn't be safe there or any American. And so I thought I need to say something. So I wrote an article, an analysis in the Armed Forces Journal. So I kind of stayed, I didn't leak it to the press generally, but inside conventional means, I went to my commanders. I told them ahead of time what I was going to publish, etc. But I said, I think this is really important. I was a major at the time, and I think that probably they thought, well, who's going to care what a major thinks anyway? So it's the Armed Forces Journal. It's not like the New York Times or Washington Post. So they didn't say anything. Well, it turns out that when it published, that the 4-star generals in the Pentagon were furious. And so they told the general in charge of that program, and that general told the colonel that was in charge of me to either shut him up or we will, because they didn't want anyone saying anything besides this thing is doing great, because then that has to do with money. And the program won't get its money if the Congress says, hang on, this is not working. So I did do the right thing at that time, but I paid a pretty big price. I didn't have any protection. I didn't have anybody, didn't have my back. And so I was very much intimidated, and I was shut down. I didn't have a choice at that point. And so there was some other stuff happened in 2012 where I went on my last combat deployment to Afghanistan. Again, I saw that the Army leaders and the civilian leaders were saying that everything is going great. We're on the right path. We're going to win the war. And I said, yeah, we're not. In fact, you're sending people out there and they're dying in missions pointlessly just to make it look like we're doing something good when it was just an absurd mission that had no chance of success, didn't. And yet you're claiming it as success and telling people that so they keep supporting it. And so I went public and told that too. And of course, I took a lot of heat for that as well. But I did have some backers this time. I had some members of both the House and the Senate in the U.S. Congress that were, had my back, that as long as you follow the law to the T and don't violate it anywhere, don't give any classified information, we'll have your back. And so it was unpleasant, but less bad than the time before. And I was just grateful to finally, I loved the Army and would have probably served a lot longer if the opportunity had been there. But I was grateful to get out when I no longer had to worry about that over my shoulder. And so I especially when we started this channel, we just said, we're not going to be intimidated by anybody. We're just going to tell the truth. You can like it, you can hate it, you can say whatever you want, but we're not going to be intimidated because you don't like it. This is the truth as we see it. And that's kind of where we've done to this day.
Incredible. So you did say that sending troops dying pointlessly for no reason, just for some good headlines or for some good news for the upper commandment, that sounds a lot familiar to what the Russian army is doing. Right?
The thing is, it was just self-evident truth. I wasn't some brilliant person, because as it turned out, the Future Combat System was canceled because of the things that I raised in 2008. The Secretary of Defense in later 2009 recognized it and said, yeah, this is dumb. It's not going to work. Cancel the program. So we quit wasting the money. They should have done that a lot earlier. And then we found out, of course, everybody now sees that in 2021, the Afghan war did turn out bad. We did lose, and everything those people were saying was a lie. So it's not hard, but there's just not that many people willing to tell the truth, unfortunately.
So how did this situation with Pentagon then resolve when they said that they're going to shut you down no matter what? This should not go out to the public. So is this the end of the story, or were you able to push through or anything?
Well, I did. I wrote another article in the Armed Forces Journal. This time the New York Times also picked it up, and in fact, they were simultaneously published. So the word got out there, and and it was that was 2012. That was February 2012, and in I believe it was 2018. The Washington Post then published a whole thing called the Afghanistan Papers, where they revealed everything I had said, but with a lot more detail, that the American public had been lied to, that we weren't succeeding, et cetera. And obviously in 2021, everybody in the world saw the truth materialize when we lost to the Taliban. Exactly what I had warned as far back as 2009 and 2010 in other articles in the Armed Forces Journal, said this is not going to work. If you don't make changes, we're going to lose. At the time, I was mocked, and they're like, what, the Taliban, the pathetic Taliban is going to beat us? They thought that was ridiculous. But that's exactly what happened. So, take that as you will, but the claims made at the time turned out to be right.
So, is there any way you remember those article titles? Maybe we can find them later for the viewers and then put them in the description. Or maybe do you have links to those articles? You can
I do
send them.
have links. I'll send all of them to you.
So yeah, guys,
Yeah.
I will leave the links to those articles in the description. You can go ahead and read them for yourself. I think that should be a great read. So then the next question, you did also mention you were several times combat deployed, 4 times according to you, according to your description channel. So if you don't mind, can you please share this experience?
Yeah, the first one was in Desert Storm in 1991. I was part of the 2nd U.S. Cavalry Regiment, which was an armored formation, M1 tanks, Bradley fighting vehicles, scout helicopters, attack helicopters, etc. We were the vanguard for the U.S. Armored Corps that was leading the drive into the Republican Guard. When Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, etc., we were going to drive them back. We were at the tip of that spear, kind of the famous left hook of the U.S., where they went in there with these armored divisions, and we were the lead element of that. And my unit was the lead element of the lead element. So we were literally the first ones that made contact with the Iraqi Republican Guard in the northern part there in Kuwait. And it was just a really fierce tank battle. As you know, the whole ground formation war, it all was like 100 hours. And ours, we had a couple of skirmishes prior to that, but then we had the really big tank battle. It's called the Battle of 7-3 Easting. That's still written about quite a bit in American military culture today. But that was really, a super intense tank battle that fought at point blank range between the two sides. There was a big desert sandstorm that had come up and had blinded us from our helicopter scouts that we normally had about 10 kilometers in front of our advance. We also, of course, had thermal vision that we could see with a lot of stuff, but the sand just like neutralized all that. So we did it the old fashioned way. We were just moving. It was called a movement to contact, and we just crested over this small hill. And all of a sudden, our gun tubes and their gun tubes are just a few hundred meters apart. And it was a pretty wild time, I guess I can say there. But that was over the next day, and then the war itself was over like about 24 hours after that. And it was we passed on a couple of armored divisions through us to continue to go up forward a little bit further than that. Then I had another combat deployment in Afghanistan in 2005, which was mostly spent in headquarters, but I spent some time in Qatar and Kabul, and actually at CENTCOM headquarters in Tampa. I split time between those. In 2009, I was a military trainer for an Iraqi border battalion on the Iranian border, and then trained them up on a lot of the things that we were doing across the board in Iraq at that time. And then in 2010, 2011, it was my final combat deployment in Afghanistan during the Obama surge, when we had like 140,000 U.S. and NATO troops there trying to quell the Taliban and all that. And well, you know how that ended up. But that's pretty much what I was doing at those times.
The first battle, you said it's even made it to American war history books, basically. So people study this battle, tank battle, right?
They do, yeah.
Wow, that's like, it sounded intense. I cannot even imagine how it was participating in this. Like, you still, after so many years, are excited. Like, yeah, that sounds intense.
Yeah,
Like,
it was 30-something years ago, and I can remember it like it was yesterday. It's very much ingrained in my mind, as you might guess.
Is it fortunately or unfortunately you think you remember it so
Both.
vividly?
Both.
That's
It
what I
is
expect.
fortunate and unfortunate. I agree.
That's to expected. So my channel mostly focuses on Russian-Ukrainian news, and you also do videos like this. And for the first half of the interview, you pretty much were almost speaking only just about the American participation in the world conflicts. But Russia-Ukraine is mostly between these two countries. Obviously, America helps, Europe helps. So what made you then, as an American, to start talking about Russian-Ukrainian war if there's no direct participation of America?
I mean, it's just what's happening, and I just care about people. I mean, frankly, I mean, we could also talk about similar things with the Israeli war against Hamas and the Palestinian people in Gaza, in the West Bank. Now the Iranian situation is mixed in with that. But the same thing here is that it just, as somebody who is not connected personally, it's not my country that's being it's doing the fighting. It's not my country that's being invaded. So it's a lot easier for me to look in a dispassionate way, just look at the elements and the fundamentals that exist there. And I'll just tell you, it just as a human being, it's egregious to me to see, especially how the Biden administration, they get the greatest amount of blame in my view. Zelensky gets a lot too, but I think primarily it's the Biden administration, because we supported and enabled a war that any kind of rational military analysis could have told you from the beginning could not be won. And especially when they had a chance to have that negotiated settlement in Istanbul a couple of months in, and they didn't take it. And then the next, and probably the best time that Ukraine ever would have had to get a negotiated settlement on beneficial terms would have come in November of 2022, when they had just routed Russia in the north in the Kharkiv area. They had forced Russia out of Kherson City. There was never going to be a better time to do it then. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who I have taken issue with on many occasions, I was completely in agreement with him on that time, when publicly he said, this would be a really good time because Russia's hurting really bad. If you wanted to have a negotiated settlement, now's your time. But neither Biden nor Boris Johnson or Zelensky were willing to do that. In fact, they said, no, we just caused Russia this harm here. Let's keep going until we get them all out. That's where I'm saying the rational military analysis would have told you that ain't going to happen, because as badly as Russia did perform, and they did, and I've been unequivocal about their tactical performance and operational performance in the opening rounds of this war, but you look at their fundamentals and the things that go into making national combat power were always going to be able to overcome all of that. They had the personnel to overcome the losses. They had the industrial capacity to overcome the combat, the tanks and other stuff losses. They definitely had the support of the people, because they viewed this as an existential threat of the entire West against them, using Ukraine as a proxy cudgel against them. So it was the Russian people they weren't, it's not like the U.S. in Vietnam where we got tired of it, something half a world away that didn't have anything to do with us. They viewed this as an existential threat. So I knew that they were going to continue to fight, and then they would spend however long it took to get tooled up, instead of, because they were caught with their pants down. They did not expect the Ukraine side to fight as fiercely as it did, and as effectively as it did in the first round, and they paid for that in really big ways. But they had the payment, they had the money to pay for it. Was my argument. And for us to ignore those fundamentals and to keep giving Zelensky whatever he wanted, or close to what he wanted, and to continue saying, yeah, we're going to support you forever as long as it takes, and all that kind of stuff, all you're doing is getting more Ukrainian people killed, more Ukrainian territory lost. I mean, just look at what's happened since 2022, since April 2022. They would have only given up the Donbass area, no, not even the whole Donbass, but Luhansk and Donetsk. Right. And then that was when they didn't do that, when they didn't take the next opportunity. Now it's 4 oblasts, and now then, in addition to those 4, and Crimea, of course, that's in my view off the table. That's never in at play. But now then there's also fighting going on in Sumy, in the Kharkiv, and now at least reportedly in the Dnipro region. So the war keeps going in on the Ukraine side. They keep losing more people. They keep losing more territory. And there's no logical reason why that's going to stop. Russia clearly has the capacity. They can just keep going. If it's another year, another 2 years, as long as we keep rejecting all these diplomatic off-ramps, all we're doing, in my view, is condemning more Ukrainian men to unnecessary deaths, and just making the cost of losing greater. Because in my view, it's already said there's no way that Ukraine can do anything but lose the war. The question is, how big is the final bill going to be? And that's why this motivates me and animates me so much, because I grieve for the human cost of this. Because I've seen it in all these conflicts I have. I've seen what the people who are killed in this war look like. I've seen the widows, and that includes even those in the United States, and how anguishing and just grief-stricken that is for every individual family member and friend who suffers that. And that never gets on the Western media here. We don't ever talk about the cost to the Ukraine side. We just talk about how, yay, go get Russia and go kill Russians. That's cool. And Lindsey Graham, best money we ever spent, and all that kind of stuff, ignoring the human cost of this. And that's what I'm focused on, and why I animate so much on this war.
Yes, that's like literally so important to think about the humans, also including from both sides, even from other participating countries, directly or indirectly. Really, what puts human tragedy into this war, and you just described it perfectly. You also did mention that November, whenever Kharkiv region, the almost entire region was liberated at once, it felt like Kherson followed. I think, yes, a lot of people here on YouTube, in the politics, presidents, world leaders, everyone thought that Ukraine liberated one region, then another region, and then everyone thought that, okay, the victory is somewhere around the corner, just maybe a little bit more push, a little bit more assistance from the allies, US, Europe, and maybe Ukraine can actually finish this war, push Russians all the way down to Crimea, the only occupied territory left. I guess that's why the war continued, because everyone just had this emotional victory, which which is also important because it boosted the morale of the soldiers so much like never before, because it was a major 2 victories in a row. So I guess that's why they kept going. What do you think, by the way, if the support increased, if the US, if the allies of Ukraine, if they saw that these victories are possible, if liberating regions in 2 days, I don't know, Kherson liberation was so quick, do you think it will be possible to end war
I'll
there?
tell you what, there's, again, because I can be dispassionate. It's not my country that was invaded, so I didn't have those emotional strings. Uh, what Russia did, especially in the Kherson city issue, was contrasted with what Ukraine did. You could say both in Bakhmut and in Krinky. And you saw two starkly different approaches. And this is one of the things that convinced me that Ukraine had no chance and that Russia was inevitable going to win. When they left the Kherson, they had been humiliated in the north because they had way too few troops to hold this massive area here. And they just didn't have the ability. And the Ukraine side did a masterful job of deception and to hiding the troops and what they were actually going to do. And then they had a great plan to drive them out, what it was there. So they did. That was a terrific situation for the Ukraine side. The one in Kherson, though, was a bit different because the Russian side was faced with, okay, the Antonovsky Bridge is weakened. The ability to continue making supplies is going to be very difficult if we hold that city. But it was a major city that they had, and they could have done something like what the Ukrainians eventually did in Bakhmut or so. They could have made it incredibly costly for Ukraine to drive them out. Or they could say, we're just going to completely abandon it altogether, not have to try this difficult period to get it reinforced, move all of those troops out, blow the bridges so that now our flank is secured. And we've got all these troops here, these experienced and trained troops. Now we can use them elsewhere. We can use them as train the trainers, whatever, so that it can strengthen the remainder of our force here. That's what Russia chose to do. And they also had the patience to say, and now then we're just going to suck it up. It's going to take us a full year before we can get back to the offensive. So we blew the bridges here. We moved our troops off. And now we started digging those, what they call the Surovikin lines, the 5 lines of defense that Russia did throughout its area. Meanwhile, they're building up their industrial capacity in the rear. They had that initial mobilization of 300,000 to kind of prime the pump, and now they start recruiting people, getting them trained, etc. But they spent a full 12 months in the defensive in order to then go back on the offensive, which they have been on really ever since that time. The Ukraine side, in contrast, would not take the long-term view on anything. It's like the Bakhmut issue. That was one of the first big ones here. They kept that city a lot longer than they should have. The same actually applied in Mariupol early. If they had withdrawn their troops when it became untenable, for when the Russians were coming up closer there, they could have withdrawn from the city, moved back to the next defendable position that gave advantages to the defenders. For example, once you get inside the city, now that it's house-to-house fighting, you can come right up to the next door to them. You can be fighting from one floor and they're fighting in another, etc. And that's exactly what happened, which means that you can get up to the line of contact easily. But if you had withdrawn from that and moved back to the next defendable position, now then you can make it much more painful for the Russians to advance, because you would have to advance through open territory, and it's easy to pick them off, like what the Ukraine side did in let's see, I can't remember the name of it right offhand. It was in the southern part. It took like 18 months for Russia to end up getting it because the defenses were so well built. It took Russia a long time and multiple opportunities to try and take that city. But instead of doing the same thing on the bigger level here, Zelensky said, no, not one building is going to be given up, not one floor, etc., that they have to wrest it from our hands. And the idea was, well, it cost the Russians a lot, but it cost the Ukraine side much more, because these troops can't be replaced. You can put new people in uniform, but you can't take replaced, experienced, and trained guys. Many of these guys had been trained all during the 8 years prior to this war, during the Civil War, if you want to use that term, since 2014. And they lost all that. And now you can't replace it. So unlike the Russians, who took 40,000 and moved them here and kept that intellectual capacity, the Ukraine side sacrificed all those. And I think they've been behind the key ever since. This issue in Krinky down on the Dnipro River, one of the most waste of human life I've ever seen. I was shocked that they tried to do that following, I guess it was in 2023, because it looked good on paper. It briefed well in media, but militarily, it was nothing but a complete and total sacrifice of Ukrainian men that never had a chance to do anything. So all of those things, and then of course the Kursk offensive, another complete disaster that just again cost a lot of the trained men you had, a lot of the vehicles that you had that were, some of the modern stuff, all sacrificed, which then weakened the Eastern Front. All the decisions that were made were the emotionally popular, but strategically foolish, that it continued to weaken the Ukraine side. Whereas the Russians, they were willing to be patient, and now their patience is paying off now. And I think that's just one of the reasons why I say that there is no military path to even avoiding defeat for the Ukraine side at this point.
So you did mention Kursk offensive. So could it be that what Ukraine? Because obviously, whenever Ukrainians were invading into Kursk region, it was not like that they were going to capture the whole Russia or a big part of it or go all the way until Moscow. So most likely they had the idea that maximum what they can reach is the capital city, Kursk itself. Could it be maybe the morale boost fight? Because at that time it was years already of war with no major advancements, major liberations, nothing like this. The best analogy I can think here, for example, since I play hockey, I watch hockey. When the hockey game is like very slow and your team is losing 0-1, 0-2 and no attacks is happening, sometimes like a fight is needed. When your guy, tough guy who is not a professional player or anything, he just fights good. He just goes on, fights with another guy from another team. The crowd goes wild. Everyone is applauding, 25,000 people cheering. And this just boosts, motivates your team to play better. So maybe Kursk offensive was like a morale boost. What do you think?
Well, unfortunately, it's not a hockey game, and
I
there's not
know.
a bunch of cheering. There's men dying. So I don't know the actual number. It's been reported up to 70,000 Ukrainian men are dead because of that. And that's a permanent loss. So even if it was a morale boost, it was a temporary one, and it was a false one, because there was no hope for that to achieve anything good for the Ukraine side, and it came at the expense of inflicting more Russian casualties on the front line, where they could have had in the especially on the Eastern Front there, in the Pokrovsk area, especially because that's when Russia made the big advances there during the first part of this Kursk offensive. You could have maybe even slowed that down, if not even prevented that big push up that time, and increased the casualties on the Russian side to go up in there. So I think that whatever morale boost it gave, so obviously it's gone now, but so too are 70,000 Ukrainian men and all of those hundreds or thousands of combat vehicles that went along with it that could have been used in areas of vital interest to the Ukraine side. So I don't think that was worth it at all. And if that was their intent, I think it was a bad play.
You always have to take risks in war more than ever. So maybe that was just Ukrainian
I
commander
agree.
taking a risk.
Believe me, I'm a cavalryman by trade. That's what we did, and I'm all about risk. But a risk has to be a rational risk, that you have a good, at least a decent, maybe not even good. You have to have a decent chance of success. But if it's reckless, if it's just it'll make a big splash, but end up costing you more, and it's predictable, then that's not taking a risk. That's making a foolish move that harms you, and that's where the distinction I would make between those two.
Well, I get you. I hear you loud and clear. Let's get back maybe to some other topics that you
Okay.
make videos about, because long story short, you have like once again more than 3,000 videos on your channel. You speak about everything, even Mexican cartels, Afghanistan, Syria, Israel, Iran, and of course Ukraine. And once again, as an American, what do you think is so important for American people to learn and to hear about? Which conflicts, which state of their own country? What do you think is very important for them to hear and learn about?
Well, what I think right now is the thing that has me the most animated right now is that we need to be paying a lot of attention to how the Russia-Ukraine war is being fought, and how our doctrine has not kept up with the modern warfare. It's not just a technical issue; it's also a training and a doctrine issue. And I don't think that we have learned enough of the lessons. And I was interviewing on my show or rather playing on my show an interview between a Russian journalist and a Russian YouTuber. I'm sorry, a Russian drone operator. And he made the comment there, and some that I've also interviewed on both sides of the line, said that the two best armies in the world right now are Russia and Ukraine. Then that means not the United States, not Germany, not France, not even China. It's Russia and Ukraine, and I'm completely in agreement with that because I obviously make the argument that this war is already determined, the outcome is determined, but the way that the Ukraine side is fighting is just phenomenal, especially with so many things arrayed against them and so many psychological things against them, and yet they don't stop. They don't, and I watch what they do at the tactical level, and a lot of it is just really, really impressive. I mentioned the Bakhmut and the Krinky that were strategically bad moves, but at the tactical level and how they fight, they are just among the fiercest fighters that in the world today, and they're effective at the tactical level. There's just not enough of them, and so that's why I say it's going to go that way. But for us, we just had this big parade here in Washington, D.C., where President Trump, on the 250th anniversary of the founding of the U.S. Army, again, repeated what he says a lot, what most in America say, that we have the most amazing, incredible army in the history of the war, of the earth. Biden made the same claim. In the whole history of humanity, nobody has had a military as good as ours. That's just not true. It's practically not true. And even though this time I do have some emotional connections, I'm still looking at this as a sober military mind. And I'm telling you, we are not that. If we went to war today, just forget about the implausibility of it, but if for some dumb reason we went to war against the Ukrainian army or against the Russian army, we would get beat because we are not equipped properly. We definitely don't have the training, and we don't have the experience. And that's what both Ukraine and Russia have that we don't have at the mass level, is somebody who has combat experience. And I don't even include myself in that path because I had one tank battle in 1991, and I'm one of the few in America that did, and nobody else has in the past. We've been fighting against the Taliban, which is, dudes running around in sandals and flip flops and shooting a rifle. They don't have an air force. They don't have a drone force. They don't have artillery. They don't have rockets. They don't have jets, navies, none of that stuff. We haven't fought anybody that has that stuff. And I think mentally we're not agile, even though we like to say we are. And so I'm really focused on, we need to not even change, but probably radically transform our doctrine, how we train, how we're equipped, how we fight on the ground, the tools that we have. And all of it's right there to be seen every day on the ground in Ukraine. But I don't think we're learning that lesson.
You mentioned that you think that the war outcome is already determined. Who do you think is going to win then?
It's certain it's the Russian side, without question.
And how the victory is going to look like, you think, in your opinion?
It's going to end in one of two ways. One is that somehow there's going to be a breakthrough emotionally or psychologically, and there's going to be a negotiated settlement. It's going to be an ugly one. There's going to be the demilitarization of the Ukraine armed forces are going to be to some small degree, but the fighting will stop. The lines of the amount of territory that Ukraine has will finally stabilize and stop going away, and there will be a Ukraine continue to exist, and it will have capacity to exist, at least economically, especially with the West. Or they're going to not have that moment, and even if it's a year, 2 years from now, the Russian forces will just continue to methodically mow through and destroy the Ukraine armed forces until probably at some point it just collapses and the defense breaks, like something like maybe what happened in France in June 1940, where the Nazis in that case had a breakthrough somewhere where unexpected in the lines, and this huge, very modern British and French force had a panic attack because the Germans came in behind them and rolled the whole thing up, and then Dunkirk and all that followed. I think something like that is the most likely scenario, as slow to, literally just continuing to shrink all the way up to the Dnieper River or all the way up to the gates of Kiev, etc. I think you'll probably get a break somewhere, but one of those two things I think is what's going to happen.
Do you think it's possible that Russia can exhaust its resources first? Because Ukraine still gets support from its allies, America, Europe, once again. Maybe not in the quantities they wanted, but still they do get the support. So as a lot of people see, America and Europe is just sending Ukraine enough support just not to lose the war. Maybe not necessarily to win it, but not to lose it. So it's kind of in some way Russia almost against the whole developed world. What do you think? Can maybe Russia exhaust its resources first?
I've heard that claim that we've given enough, not to lose, but I would recharacterize that as that we've given them enough to lose slowly, not to avoid losing, just not to lose slowly. But there's no amount that's that you can give. I mean, you would literally have to empty all of the coffers of the entire Western alliance. Like, for example, the U.S. would have to say, all right, We have the 1st Armored Division, the 1st Infantry Division, 1st Cavalry Division. We're going to give lock, stock, and barrel everything we have to the Ukraine side and more, even from maybe the 2nd Cavalry Regiment, et cetera, my old outfit. Everything. That still wouldn't be enough because you have to have trained people that's able to use it, and Ukraine just doesn't have enough men to do that. So it's just not going to matter. But even if at that description, you just had the United States say, we're going to now cut off what we've been giving you. And it was already definitely going to go down even before this recent announcement. So we're already saying that especially on 155 millimeter artillery shells and on air defense interceptor missiles, those are basically off the table now. So we're not going to give those. But even before that, when you look at the sum total of everything that the Western Alliance gave in 2022 and 2023 for that offensive, that was the high watermark. And it was tons of stuff that went over there. Didn't even dent the lines on the Russian side. Now then, since that time, there's been a fraction of that that's been offered, and there's no ongoing pipeline. But the Russians have a pipeline. That's the difference, is that there simply isn't enough that the West can give. It's not enough to give money. It's not enough to do what the Western Europeans are saying right now, which is, yeah, we're going to give you all this money and all this new stuff, and it's going to take like 5 years to produce it. Ukraine doesn't have 5 years. This stuff needs to be on the trains tomorrow if it's going to have any impact on the fight that's going on now, and it's not going to be because they don't have it. And the stuff that they're going to build has such long lead times, it's not going to get there. But Russia went to something close to full mobilization, and they do have the stuff cranking off factories and whatever. They can bring that stuff to bear, even though they're suffering a lot of losses on the front line, and it's clear that they are. But they have it both in manpower and in equipment, and especially in drones and rockets and glide bombs. Ukraine side can never match that. And you had the U.S. General Cavoli in testimony a couple of months back admit that the best the cumulative West is doing, especially in artillery shells, is like a third of what the Russia and its allies, especially North Korea, are producing. We can't match it. So all of the West combined can't match what Russia is doing by itself, and especially with North Korea. So you see that the balance of things that go in, it's an attritional warfare. And if you have more men, equipment, and industrial capacity and air power and air defense, much more than your opponent, there's just no way mathematically you can hold out.
So then what do you think about then Trump's and Putin relationship, since Trump, as many people see him as much more favorable president of the United States towards Russia and the continuation of this war? But then we saw many examples of Putin almost like kind of betraying Trump, saying we're going to talk with Ukraine, and then this talk result in nothing. So it feels like Putin is just playing with Trump. What do you think this relationship looks like? Where is it going?
I think there's something to that because and I want to say it was December of 2024 after Trump had won, but before he was inaugurated. A lot of questions about would Russia consider a ceasefire? So it was already being broached even before Trump got into office, and Russia just categorically said no, of course not. It's a road to nowhere. We won't even consider it until all the root causes are addressed or whatever. But we'll negotiate, we'll talk, but we aren't going to stop fighting. And then Trump comes in and he tries to give this push for an unconditional ceasefire. He strong arms Zelensky to publicly agree to one, even though he didn't want to do it before. And I think that Russia said, okay, we'll play along. Okay, we'll consider it, from categorical rejection in December to now in January. All right, we'll consider it, but with these nuances and these conditions, whatever, that everybody knew that the Western side and Ukraine would never agree to. So I think that they were signaling that, sure, we'll keep talking. That was in this phone conversation between Putin and Trump on what is today? Yeah, on Thursday, last Thursday. And again, you see that Putin says, yeah, we're still willing to negotiate. We're still willing to talk. We're ready for a third round of talks with Ukraine. But he was very clear to say what we call the root causes and our conditions are non-negotiable. So we'll talk. We'd rather have a negotiated end, but only on our terms. And they, they're saying lots of nice things about Trump in that call. According to the readout on the Russian side, they congratulated Trump for the Independence Day on the 4th of July. He congratulated him on a legislative bill that had passed or whatever. So he's trying to be nice to him. But when you look at what the actions are, it's clear that Putin said, no, we're going to have all of our objectives at our terms, or we'll just keep fighting. And that's what he said last month. And I think that's still what he's doing today.
So then you think maybe then whatever these conditions that Russia, specifically Putin, is offering to Ukraine in order to stop the war, which is basically can be summarized as complete surrender of these
That's how
regions.
I view it. Yeah, I think
So,
that's exactly right.
not a single meaningful president would even accept this. Like, I mean, imagine if Mexico, Canada
Yeah.
invades US and then says, "You give us Texas, or we're just not going to keep fighting." And because obviously Ukraine's coming back to Russia and Ukraine, Zelensky obviously does not want to agree this will be political self-destruction, because once again, just you give the aggressor the territories that he wanted. What stops then Putin from the future to resupply the army, to rebuild tanks and everything, to raise new generation of soldiers, and then go and continue conquesting, continue taking Ukrainian territory? Like, what stops then Putin from doing this in the future?
Well, that's I would slightly disagree or have a different view on the interpretation. It's because I do agree completely that it would be political suicide for Zelensky to accept this. But and here's where I differ from really everybody that I've talked to, and this beats almost all the West. I view that the strongest leader is going to say, all right, I'm looking at all the fundamentals here. We cannot continue to resist. I'm being given basically terms of surrender here. That 12-point peace plan that the Russians presented at the last Istanbul meeting was little different than terms of surrender. I totally agree with that. But here's where the issue is. If I don't take this political suicide, as you termed it, and I say we're not going to do that, we're just going to keep fighting, then instead of these bad terms that are existed on that 12 points, you're going to get no terms. And then you're going to get possibly tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of more Ukrainians dead. And at the end of the day, it's still going to be a Russian victory. That's my position here, is that it's either take an ugly end now, it's political suicide for Zelensky, and it definitely would be, or you can not take the political suicide, and instead you're going to have so many more people killed. 5 years from now, if there's 100,000 people that are alive right now as you and I are talking, and 5 years from now they're still alive with an ugly deal, that's a whole lot better than an even uglier military defeat that's just imposed on Ukraine, and all those men are dead, but the same outcome has been achieved. That's where I think we are. And now I admit that as someone who, I'm not talking about my country, I'm talking about somebody else's country. And you're saying, yeah, but there's no guarantee of that. But it's as close to a guarantee as that there can be, just based on how wars are fought and won.
Well, hear you once again, loud and clear. We have a tradition on this channel to end the interview with one simple, short question, and the answer could be as simple as just one sentence. So don't overthink it, whatever comes first to your mind.
Okay.
If you are in front of Putin, what will you tell him?
If I'm in front of Putin, I mean, I would, if I'm me, or if I'm like the president of the United States or president of Ukraine,
just you.
if it's just me, I would just say, just, wow, that's harder than I expected. Because I can't tell him to having a settlement that's at Ukraine's advantage, because no, I wouldn't do it if I was the president of the country that had the military advantage. I guess I would just say, have as much mercy as you can, and give in everywhere that you can, if that's going to help bring peace together faster.
Well, that's perfect. Thanks so much, Daniel. Daniel Davis, Lieutenant Colonel. Finally, I was able to pronounce it. Thanks so much for taking the interview. Thanks so much for answering the question, for participating. It was a pleasure. It was interesting. I hope the viewers found it interesting as well. It was an episode of Thank God It's Monday podcast. Thank you guys so much for watching. See you tomorrow.